I have a bit of history with this one. Around the time I was in middle school, I had a friend who I used to stay the night with all the time. I guess you could call him my best friend at that point. I have so many great memories of being introduced to things that I would come to love dearly later on in my life at that house. Dragon Ball, Kingdom Hearts, and most importantly, a stable high-speed internet connection. I'm still working on getting myself a copy of that one. The house that I grew up in and currently live in has such terrible internet that I'm sure some of you would cry at the sight of my download speeds. My family just didn't grow up with a high-speed internet connection, so in turn, I didn't grow up with access to online games or online gaming services. So when I did get to go to my friend's house on some weekends, I would often bring over some of my own games so that I could get a taste of what they would be like if I did have the ability to play online. This is gonna make me sound shallow, but the best part about the weekend overnight stays were playing Xbox Live games at his house. I would wake up early just so I could play Call of Duty World at War online, just to get a taste. Little 12-year-old Ross was still absolutely mind-blown by the fact that I could play Halo 3 with that many people from across the world. But one Friday night, I was set to go to the movies with my friend and his family. And what movie were we set to go see? X-Men Origins Wolverine. Of course, as a couple of dumb kids, we thought it was amazing because, we were stupid. But all cracked out on buttered popcorn and Coke Ices, we went to the Xbox Live Marketplace back at his house to find something to play that night. And guess what we come across? A demo for a video game based on the movie that we were still bouncing off the walls from.
Forget it!
So of course, what did we do? We played it again and again, probably 3 times over. The demo had so many amazing set pieces and incredible spectacles that we were just in awe the whole night. The next day I had to go home, but I couldn't stop thinking about that game. It had me hook, line, and sinker, and over the next few days I would annoy my mom daily about getting it for me. I don't remember exactly if it worked or not, but one way or another, the game was mine, and it was incredible. Not only was it one of my favorite Xbox 360 games, but games in general. I had no problem playing it front to back just for the fun of it. I unlocked every costume, I got every achievement, it was the first game I ever 100% completed. But after years pass, new consoles come into the picture, I went and forgot all about Wolverine, and my original copy of the game was eventually lost to the sands of time. But I've obviously still held on to some sort of memory surrounding it. The company's splash screen at the beginning of the game has stuck with me, and I always recognize it even today when I boot up a game and it greets me like an old friend. Raven Software is the team responsible for bringing this one to life. Before Wolverine, they put out a lot of great hits like Heretic 2, Jedi Academy, the X-Men Legends series, Ultimate Alliance, etc. They had some heavy hitters underneath their belt, but in 2010, they released Singularity, a cinematic, first-person shooter revolving around time travel that people somehow think is better than Time Shift. It's not. It scored pretty well critically, but didn't perform well enough by Activision standards. So from then until our present day, Raven has been on Call of Duty duty. And this isn't even an isolated incident, mind you. The incredibly talented people that were responsible for the success that was Crash Bandicoot 4 were just sentenced to the same fate a few weeks ago with even less reasons given. Truly a tragedy. But anyway, since the release of Black Ops 1, Raven has been involved in some capacity with almost every Call of Duty release in the past decade, with, again, not a single original concept of their own to their name in that time. Most of the same team that worked on today's topic of discussion are still together to this day, cranking out admittedly great content for Warzone. That's great that they all still have jobs and technically got to stay as a studio, but I can't help but feel a bit bad on their behalf. To go from a pretty diverse and successful catalog of games in the late 90s all the way through to the late 2000s, just to make one game that doesn't do as well as the suits upstairs projected it would, means getting sent down to the Call of Duty mines for eternity. And I don't want to make up fairy tales or anything here, but I don't know what the story was behind the scenes, but I can't imagine that it was a willing choice to be strictly put on Call of Duty after Call of Duty beyond that point. It might be presumptive, but it almost seems like an ultimatum was given by Activision. Hey man, look, you and I both know that you and your team are great at what you do, but we just really can't take any more risks at this time. You understand, right? It's difficult. We can't take any more risks. Like, I'm sorry. Hey, no, come on, man, pick your head up off the ground. Look, I've got a great idea. Why don't you and your team come work for us on this project that we've got going? It's actually gonna make some money, you know, because you guys didn't make any money on sing. Anyway, yeah, so you guys come work for us on this project and I don't close your studio down. Does that sound good? Sound like a plan? Alright, awesome. Knew you'd make the right call. Later, Gator. Well, even if they aren't making exactly the things that they want to anymore, at least they still have futures in this industry. Even if they were put to use in different aspects of the game, I like to think that 2019's Modern Warfare was as good as it is because of Raven's efforts in some way, shape, or form. But a year before the game that changed Raven Software forever, Activision wanted to flex their Marvel license with a tie-in video game for Fox's upcoming Wolverine movie, and they put the guys with a high Marvel batting average on the job. So, with a brand new PC copy by my side, how much does nostalgia play into my fondness for X-Men Origins Wolverine? Is it actually a solid title, or was Singularity merely the straw that broke the camel's back? Let's find out now, shall we? X-Men Origins Wolverine is a character action game in the same vein as God of War or Devil May Cry. The player will move through each linear stage facing enemies, bosses, puzzles, some light platforming, and a few other small segments to keep things varied. The story only touches on key points from the movie, instead offering a more original adventure filled with a lot more representation of the X-Men world than— Okay, stop. I can't go on with this anymore. Look, I know we had a lot of fun together in the past, but I have higher expectations than I used to. Things that I used to be wowed by come across as something that just gets in my way. I'm a different person now, and not to sound mean or anything, but you aren't. It's not you, it's me. Now, just sit down. Because I totally lied right there, it's pretty much all you. Yes, I used to really love this game. I explained that to you all, but going back through it in 2021 with all the things I know now, all the other games I've played that do it all better, I can't say that I had a good time here, for more than a few reasons. And I want to start with the presentation. I hope and pray that this wasn't what the Xbox 360 version of this game looked like. Like maybe my graphics card isn't compatible with this game, or the PC version wasn't optimized properly, or something. Because this game looks disgusting.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
Not even by today's standards, by Xbox 360 and PS3 standards. So this game jumps back and forth between past and present timelines to change up the setting almost every other level. The past levels always take place in these jungle temples in Africa, and the present day levels are in military facilities, a snowy forest, military facilities, a casino, or a military facility. I don't think there was a single time where I thought to myself, this is a nice looking vista, or these environments are really unique and well constructed. Nuh-uh. If it's not a sterile gray interior, it's the copy-pasted jungle areas with their muted browns and greens. Nothing ever comes across as distinct or colorful enough to be mistaken for a game featuring a comic book character. I know this generation of gaming in particular wanted to prioritize the use of mature colors like in Gears of War and Call of Duty, but should a game featuring a superhero, even if hyper-violent, not strive to be a little more colorful than this? The animations are nicely done. I can safely say that the scripted and unscripted sequences of Wolverine shredding through dudes looks as good as they can considering the game's art direction. The frame rate is consistently at 60, expectedly, and there's even this impressive effect that they do with Wolverine where his battle damage will regenerate in real time on his body. His flesh and skin will get shot, cut, and blown off to show you what kind of shape you're in, and it can even get to the point where you're just a bloody adamantium skeleton walking around. But these cool visuals and effects don't mean anything when all these technical issues hamper my experience. It might not be very visible from the footage alone, but there was an obnoxious amount of screen tearing during my entire first playthrough. Every time the camera rotated or swung around, it was a little harsh on my eyes. It wasn't anything that kept me from playing, but it did make it less enjoyable. And someone on the team must have really liked Twilight Princess because there is bloom everywhere in these cinematics. Far too much in my humble opinion. It makes an already muddy looking game even more washed out. There's just nothing visually appealing to me in this game. Some character models look very underwhelming too, and the dead enemy ragdolls tend to turn into Beyblades on occasion. Scratch that, they let it rip all the f***ing time. The game has a big problem never loading the higher quality textures, so you're stuck looking at Fisher-Price playset versions of the environment half the time. I suppose the way the blood effects fly out and slash marks is pretty appealing, but when there's a big bloody explosion caused by one of your attacks, it sort of just looks like red jello, and I suppose that is a good segue into the most disappointing aspect of the game for me: the combat. I initially brought up comparisons to God of War and DMC when describing Wolverine, but I really don't think this game holds much of a candle to those two. Wolverine's combat utility is mostly built around the face buttons. The X button is used for light attacks, the Y button is your heavy attack that can also trigger a specific move depending on which light attack it follows up on. The B button is for grappling enemies. After a successful grapple, you can either pummel them with X, initiate an instant kill with a carefully timed Y button press, or throw them with the analog stick. Once the enemy has been launched, if you follow them up in the air, you can land a devastating flurry of light attacks, finished with a satisfying axe kick. You can grapple slam them back down, preferably on top of some other enemies, and if the enemy is in the air just above you on the ground, you can send them across the arena with this satisfying punch, or grab their leg to slam them down behind you ad infinitum. Disappointingly, light attacks will simply snap them back to the ground if tried at this point. A menu of special attacks can be brought up with the right trigger and then selected with the corresponding face button. You can lunge across a long distance to someone with the left bumper. When fighting enemies with melee weapons, you can parry incoming attacks, which typically acts as a launcher. Parrying also works on some projectiles. You can shoulder charge with the right bumper, which acts as a short dash. Dodge rolling into enemies will initiate a reversal that will send them across the arena, and I think you get the idea. If this all sounds like I'm repeating the same information, it's because the mechanics are repetitive themselves. There are only a handful of ways to follow up attacks with other attacks. It's not devoid of creativity, but it's also not particularly deep. There are only one or two XY attack combinations that can leave an enemy launched and ready for a follow-up, and I see launching an enemy as the preferred way to follow up attacks. When launched, the enemy can either be knocked across the arena in a few different ways, or slammed in some way with the grapple. The other way that you'll be following up attacks is when an enemy is on the ground. You can either get a bunch of light attacks in, land one big heavy attack, or pick them up with the grapple. There's no way to get an enemy back up from being on the ground in a way that keeps the pace going. Not only are downed enemies a detriment to your combo in the immediate, but also a detriment to the flow of combat in general. The game locks you into lengthy attack and recovery animations depending on what type of enemy or obstacle you're near. For example, I want to attack the enemy up this ramp with light attacks, but since I was next to a downed enemy, Wolverine snaps to him and doesn't want to do anything but pummel him. And it's the same drawn out problem for the heavy attack. And in this example, I was trying to do an aerial slam attack on the enemies below to give myself some breathing room, but that attack is triggered by holding down the heavy attack. Problem is, the game gives input priority to that admittedly strong axe kick move over the slam, so I kept getting locked into doing that move instead of the one I wanted. And when I finally did get the chance to do what I wanted, it was infinitely more effective. In the end, these things really don't matter all that much because every enemy in the game goes down so easily. You really aren't encouraged to change up your tactics in any meaningful ways. I think there's some sort of tertiary style system that nets you more experience the more you can vary your attacks in any given encounter, but as I've described previously, it's awkward to try to do this because very few attacks naturally flow into one another. The most effective way to keep combos going is to launch enemies, and that in and of itself can get very old very quickly if done repeatedly. And the few times that's not the case, it devolves into hammering the X and Y buttons when fighting anyone but one or two enemy types or bosses. The basic gun-wielding enemies amount to nothing but toys on the normal difficulty. They stand no real chance of killing you. I suppose that makes them good training dummies, I guess, that is if they don't die mid-combo. I think one thing that could make these fights more interesting is if the enemies had some means of defense from you. On occasion, some melee enemies will parry an attack, but there's so much of this epic slow-mo that you have to actively be trying to miss the counter parry to not hit it. Enemies don't dodge attacks unless they're inexplicably moving out of the range of your grabs. And I don't know if there are any basic enemies that actually block your attacks, and if they do, you can just as easily grab them for an insta-kill. There are the shield enemies with a big robot arm that block light attacks and grabs, but it's so easy to break their guard with one heavy and then insta-kill. These invisible shotgun enemies that do a good job of distancing you and can only be seen with your detective vision, grab them and insta-kill. These really cool blue teleporting mutants that make this triangle that hurts you if you touch it and they teleport all around you, grab them and insta-kill. The most fun enemy type are these staff mutants in Gambit stage, but they still can be taken out rather easily if I'm not actively just playing with them. And again, I still do fight these enemies with other moves, but strictly to keep my brain from going to sleep. And those special moves I mentioned earlier, not as useful as you would like in an action game. Rage is good because it's exactly what it sounds like. Your claws get a damage boost and there's no finisher to your light attack string, so you can just keep on slicing. The drill is the only one I really enjoy using because it feels good and it can do some crowd control, but other than that, I don't even bother. The cyclone is just too weak, and this bouncing corkscrew attack seems like it should be hitting them more than it does, especially that ending shockwave. They just deal damage in very static ways. None of them allow you to follow up with something or be followed up on themselves. The game doesn't make it a point to encourage me to experiment with anything else. Mostly all of my attacks can hurt or kill every enemy, but if any of them actually start giving me trouble, I know I have a way to easily get them off the field. And that's when the AI isn't being an absolute, irredeemable dumbass. You know, I was really surprised by this Wile E. Coyote reference they put in this X-Men game. Oh, and that lunge attack isn't good for keeping any kind of combos going either. It can be used to follow up, but it puts enemies on the ground, which isn't the best, as I've explained. Now, on a more positive note, I think the game generally can be a lot of fun. Most notably, the boss fights. They're all pretty enjoyable for the most part. Deadpool was alright, his counter struggle felt really good to successfully do because it shaves off a considerable portion of his health. Gambit's level was a lot of fun. You fight him a few times throughout the course of the stage, ending with this final battle on the outside of the casino. You have to bounce projectiles back at him and use the lunge at the right time. It's a great fight. All of Sabretooth's fights are good, but they don't last long enough. Not to mention, he literally just has Wolverine's moveset. And all of his voice clips are the same as Wolverine's as well. Actually, I'm fairly certain they recycled this same skeleton several times throughout the game, which is weird for me to complain about because I constantly praise games that have boss fights pitting you against an enemy with a similar moveset to your own. But here, pretty much every enemy is similar to your own skill, so it gets a bit stale after a while. Oh, sorry, my bad, more nice things to say. When I'm not trying to play it like a Bayonetta game, if I don't worry about trying to get stylish combos and vary my attacks, when I ignore how similar literally every encounter is, it feels pretty alright to play. I would even say maybe good. The moveset may not have been designed to really flow into itself and encourage you to play with the toys you're given, but what is here has a nice oomph to it. Light attacks feel quick and razor sharp, and while some of the heavy finishers for light combos aren't very useful, some in particular seem to be missing hitboxes, others do have their uses. Options for a launched enemy, while quite limited, are a lot of fun to play around with. Whether that be the light attack flurry, that axe kick, or the grab slam, they can all be useful. And there are some rare animations you can get if you press the heavy attack when an enemy is close to death, and Wolverine will finish them in a violent way. For as much flack as I've given the instant kill move, I would be lying if I were to say I didn't enjoy seeing some of these animations play out. This goes for the environmental hazards as well. I've failed to mention it up until now, but certain props in the environment can be used to instantly take out enemies if they get thrown or hit into them, or if you grapple someone when you're right next to one. It's usually things like statues with spikes or pipes sticking out of the ground, but they all have the same purpose of taking an enemy out of the game instantly, and also being as violent as possible. All of the blood and gore plays a big part in the feel of the game. It really does make you feel like a killing machine when you're just slicing enemies up without even really trying. There was an attempt to bring some variation to the game at certain points. There are a number of cinematic moments that don't require much input from the player, but end in a huge violent display of fan service. There are the aforementioned puzzles, none of which being anything to write home about other than this one involving a battery-powered door and a crate. There are tons of collectibles thrown around to find. These dead bodies with dog tags are everywhere and reward you with XP bonuses. These mutagens that give you varying buffs are, well, they exist. You can find small permanent health increases, and I mean small, And hidden slightly more thoughtfully are these classic Wolverine statues. If you find the majority of one of the costumes, you can unlock a challenge in the menu. These were really cool to find and fight, but I wish they were a bit stronger because they're really fun to fight, but they can't take a punch at all. There were also some, huge air quotes here, stealth sections. These amounted to you being undetected for the first 2 minutes of a level, and you can stealth kill a guard or two if you're lucky. The game wasn't built for stealth, so it feels very unintuitive. I remember distinctly losing my mind when I saw this happen as a kid. And no, before I get the comments, I wasn't a disturbed child. This shit was fucking awesome. And a lot of this game skates by on the cool factor alone. Seeing all these satisfying animations with the epic slow-mo that accompanies the end of encounters, junk food. There isn't much in the way of substance, but man does it feel and look cinematic at times. In fact, I would say that the demo I played all those years ago is the best part of the game. It starts with you dropping from a helicopter into a war zone, and then just before you hit the ground, you get that little title card splash and then literally explode onto the ground. Then after that, it's nothing but eye candy violent set piece after purely cool factor violent set piece. And I think that's what this game sort of boils down to. The RPG mechanics actively work against a stylish action game by making me strong enough to kill basic enemies with a shoulder charge by endgame. The special buffs you find make no noticeable difference on combat or how you play. The environments don't look good and have problems even looking finished, but the animations are well constructed, if often obscured by an unruly camera. The story is...
What the f*** is that?
So yeah, still a masterpiece. Combat isn't very deep, but man, does it make you feel like a badass sometimes.
Are these helicopter sections all that mechanically deep?
Nah, not really, but tell me that doesn't look awesome.
So this sentinel hand doesn't do anything but turn and shoot, right?
Nah, that's it. But watch this. These guys blow up when you shoot them. It's great. Ooh! Yeah, look at that! As I see it, a huge contributing factor towards the game skewing more on the easier side is how many of your maneuvers leave you completely invulnerable to any attacks. The instant kill, the reversal, anytime you parry an enemy, using the environment for a kill, all of these lengthy animations play out with every possible damage just phasing through you like nothing's even there. I think it all circles back to the idea of the power fantasy being front and center. The developers want you to feel unstoppable above everything else, so enemies hitting you out of these brutal attacks would hamper that vision. But the decision they made to remedy this problem ends up hurting the game and its core structure by sidelining the enemies that facilitate the brutal things Wolverine can do. It comes across as a classic case of trying to have your cake and eat it too. They want to be this stylish action game, but also want to deliver an unstoppable Wolverine experience. The first band-aid solution that comes to mind would be to allow players to expend a small amount of the special meter to execute an instant kill, and maybe dictate the amount used depending on how dangerous the enemy type is. And don't give the players the chance to abuse something like invincibility for the duration of the animation. I would much rather be knocked out of the attack when I recklessly use it in a crowd, but give them the ability to cancel the attack into a dodge or a block. That would come with its own problems and issues to work around, but it'd be a start. There's nothing wrong with giving us all these different finishing moves that look great and feel great to pull off, but if the fight, or the game for that matter, wasn't satisfying to get through in order to use those finishing moves, does it not feel a little hollow afterwards? I know it did for me. Something about this game can't help but feel a little unfinished. I know I've shown off some of the bugs, but there are just so many that aren't one-time oopsies. After my first playthrough, the visuals were just so poor that I had to do some research. I found that there is a mod which fixes the screen tearing, makes the frame rate more consistent, speeds up texture loading, and just makes it nicer to look at overall. Thank God. Because it genuinely feels like they didn't get to do everything they wanted to here, which bums me out to say because you can tell that the people working on this game loved it to pieces. There's an ongoing series of videos by Just Add Monsters that is shining a spotlight on the team who made this game all those years ago. They all loved Wolverine as a character, and they all love video games in general. There's a World of Warcraft Easter egg right here. There's a Portal Easter egg right here, and I still have love for this game. I'll probably always have love for this game. I played it the same way today as I did all the way back when. I'm sure I got every collectible, every dog tag, found the secrets, I even cleared out the grocery store in the fight against Blob, knowing good and well I wouldn't be getting any achievement for it, but I guess I just couldn't help myself. If I've inspired you to pick up this game for the PC after today's video, I implore you to use the link in the description, which will take you to the graphical mod to make the game a lot easier on your eyes. Maybe I'm just a hopeless romantic stuck in the past, but I think it's safe to say that I don't love X-Men Origins Wolverine like I used to. I still do, and probably always will, have love for it, but I just can't go back to it like I had before after playing the games and seeing the things I have today. If I can end this one on some sort of positive note, I hope that Raven Software can eventually get back to making original games at some point. Because while this one is by no means bad, it's certainly not one I'll be revisiting for a very long time. But anyway, I appreciate you for watching, so thanks for stopping by and have a great day.